In this video, we're going to talk about protagonists, antagonists, and story arcs. I'm going to start with a question, which is, what is a protagonist? Now, many of you will have come across the word protagonist as an idea of a hero within a story, but a protagonist can be much more than that. A protagonist is the main character within any play, film, book, or whatever that we as an audience are consuming. And the key part of the protagonist is that the plot follows their experiences and, most importantly, their character development. If the plot isn't following that character, then they aren't the protagonist. That's how we know who they are. Now, a protagonist tends to be a likable or admirable or a relatable person, because in any good play or film, the audience wants to be able to empathize and like and invest themselves into the protagonist. So the protagonist also needs to develop through the play or the film, so they can change through learning about something to do with themselves or someone else within their relationship, because the protagonists are not perfect and they often have a character flaw. This is part of the thing that makes them relatable and real to the audience, because we all have flaws and because we'd all like to be able to overcome them, and we invest ourselves in a protagonist because they do have to overcome that problem, that flaw, that relationship to be better. And so the way the protagonist changes from the start to the end is called their character arc, and it forms the central part of the plot of the film or the play that you're watching. So we take our protagonist, Luke Skywalker, from A New Hope, and we look at that story arc that he follows in the film. And he starts at the beginning of the film, over here, where he lives on a quiet planet far away from the rebellion, and he's a warrior. And he finds out that he's a Jedi. And he develops that, but of course he's a warrior. He's not too sure about it. He thinks he's not going to be good enough to overcome his fear of it. So he decides that actually he doesn't want to become a Jedi, and that he wants to stay at home. Because events overtake him somewhat, and the Empire destroys Luke's home and way of life. And so, still worried, Luke is forced to leave his home planet. He's on his journey to overcome his worry, but it's still there. He still can't quite grasp it. But eventually he's forced to overcome his fear, which is of course his character flaw, and starts to learn the way of the Jedi to help fight against the Empire. And by the end he overcomes that fear and successfully uses the Force to destroy the Death Star and win the battle against the Empire. So that then becomes Luke Skywalker's character arc through the film, and of course that there forms the central part of the plot of the film. There's lots of other characters that come in and come out and influence him and help him, but essentially that is about his journey through the film. But there's a second character in there which is really important, and of course that's the antagonist. And the antagonist is the character who causes problems or trouble for the protagonist. Now in a Star Wars, the protagonist is the Empire, the evil Empire, the idea of the evil Empire. And of course the leader of that is Darth Vader, and he's very much the kind of typical antagonist. He's the one who causes problems all the way through for the protagonist. The key to the antagonist is this, that they don't change. They don't learn from their mistakes, and they remain the same all the way through the play or the film. And that's the fact that they don't learn becomes part of their downfall. They don't keep up with the changes that are taking place in the protagonists. So quite often in the films that we watch and the plays that we watch, the antagonist starts on top. The antagonist is the one who's in charge, who's in the lead, who's got the power. And by the end, that power has shifted, and it's the protagonists who have won. And part of the downfall of the antagonist is that they don't learn about that change and they don't change themselves quick enough. So here's our story of A New Hope, and we've got Luke Skywalker's character arc going through the story, and each and every time we've got the Empire not learning, staying the same, keep fighting without anything new, without any change. And I wanted to think about how we can add plot structure into this story. And so one of the common plot structures that we know of is the beginning, middle and end. And here we've got this idea that the beginning is led by establishing Luke Skywalker, establishing the world of the Empire and the fact that it's in space, and we've got the rebellion, and we've got lots of different characters. We've got the protagonist, the antagonist. So we establish lots of things in that first part of the story. And then we build from there and on that by building up that tension towards the climax here. So we eventually get to the point where Luke Skywalker is forced to overcome his fear and take the fight on with the Empire. And so that then establishes the end. And by the end, we know that he's going to go and win. We don't know how, but we know that he's going to go and to win. Another story structure that you might be familiar with is the idea of opening, build-up, problem, resolution and ending. So we've got our opening part of the story, again that establishes the world of Star Wars and the scenario and the characters and all these different elements that make up the story. And then we start to get the build-up, and in that build-up those different elements start to come together. So we've got the Jedi and Luke, and they start to come together and then build that into the rebellion against the Empire. So we start to understand where the tension is between those two. And so we start to bring those individual elements up into one thing, which then of course leads to a problem. And here the problem is that actually Luke's got to then leave his planet, he's got to start a new life, he's got to join the rebellion, he's got to keep the fight up. That then takes us to a resolution. He can't keep on worrying, he can't keep fighting against what's happening around him. He's got to overcome his fear, which is his character flaw, and he's got to start learning the ways of the Jedi in order to help fight the Empire. And so that then takes us back to the end, which we kind of already know is going to happen, because he's going to use the Force to then destroy the Death Star and win the battle. And those two are really good ways of structuring a plot. But I want to introduce you a third way, which is Freytag's plot structure. Now, according to Fraytag, all drama, whatever that is, in a play or a film, is divided into 5 parts, or acts. And it's true, most stories and most films that we watch are divided into these 5 acts. Romantic comedy has a completely different form of structure, but most action films and plays that we watch have these 5 different acts. And it starts like this. It starts with the exposition, which is a portion of the story which introduces the background of the information to the audience, gives you setting, gives you ideas of what happened before the plot, the characters' backstories, who the characters are, things like that. Then we get into a more longer element of the story where we start to rise the action, which is a series of events which builds towards the greatest point of interest, which is of course the climax. And the climax, which normally happens about 2/3 of the way through the film, is the moment where the protagonist's fate changes. That's the moment when they realise they've got to change. In Luke Skywalker's moment, it's when he realises that he can use this Force, can overcome his fear, and he can use it to fight and win. And that's the key bit. That's the moment when we were saying that the balance tips in the story from the antagonist being in control and having the power to then the protagonist being able to fight back and win. So then we have the falling action, which is a series of conflicts. It doesn't have to be one, but it's a series of conflicts between the protagonist and the antagonist, with the protagonist normally winning, but of course it doesn't have to be. They can lose and the antagonist can win. But it's all about that conflict, and in many films that's when the biggest part of the conflict occurs, in terms of kind of the most action parts of the film. And then that then leads us to the final element, which is the denouement, which is the events that happen after the fallout, after that all happens. So it's the very end. It's normally can just last 2 to 3 minutes in some cases. It is literally just a quick scene saying, yep, life is carrying on, life is fine. In Star Wars, it's the moment where they get the medals around their neck and everyone cheers and says, well done. It's the end. It's the bit that shows everyone life is okay again. So I've kind of mapped that against Luke Skywalker and A New Hope. Not particularly very well, but it goes like this. So you've got exposition here, which again is the same thing as the opening and the beginning, which establishes Luke Skywalker's life, everything's happened before him, and the rebellion and the Empire, and the possibility that there will be conflict between that. Then we've got the rising action, and once we've established that there's a possibility of conflict, those different elements start to come together, they start to form to create some sort of tension which rises, and to that point of climax, which happens 2/3 of the way through the film. And at this point, you know something good's going to happen. You know that it's going to be able to happen. So the climax really actually just takes place. It's a very short section. And then it goes into the falling action, where then we see the fallout of that. We see the protagonist get stronger and stronger and learn. And then we see a final battle where the antagonist wins and beats the protagonist. Or the protagonist beats and wins the antagonist, whichever way it ends up being. And then at the very end, right on the end, just before the credits, just before the curtain closes, we see the denouement, which is where, yep, life is fine, life carries on, it's going to be okay. So Freytag structure is a much more interesting and complex way of looking at how to structure a story and how to write a plot of a play.